Welcome back to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This is the B Block, or second section of this week's news show. I'm Alaina Pinto. Last month, we reported on the German company Viterial that had completed a research study that concluded that cannabis was a much safer alternative treatment for chronic back pain. That clinical trial was the first time in European history that a multi-compound cannabis medicine passed the rigorous RCTP, or randomized controlled trial procedure. In this week's Prohibition Partners newsletter, editor Ben Stevens believes that the significance of this milestone, quote, risks of being underplayed, unquote. This study could pave the way for cannabis to be more accepted by the entirety of the European Union. With more from Europe, and specifically the UK, here's Dave Barton, followed by Debi Facey in Canada.
I'm Dave Barton from Thermador with your UK Cannabis report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. A UK cannabis clinic has set up a dedicated women's health service amid reports that NHS waiting lists for conditions like endometriosis and perimenopause are reaching crisis levels. Alternaleaf, the clinic in question, has set up the service in response to a 50% increase in female patients every 3 months. The clinic's medical director, Nabila Chowdhury, said that she was determined to take a robust approach to women's health and address medical misogyny. Reports show that there's a broadening gender care gap here in Britain, which private clinics are poised to fill, as conditions like heavy periods and endometriosis are often dismissed by NHS doctors. Raising awareness of the positive effect that cannabis can have on women's health continues to be an ongoing challenge globally. Or as Nabila Chowdhury puts it, while it won't be for everyone, cannabis is a valid option for thousands of women suffering from common but life-altering conditions. That's all for this week's UK report. I'm Dave Barton from Thermador reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
This is Debi Facey with the Canadian Coast to Coast Cannabis News Report. So what we have in Canada this week is the OCS has awarded over $527,000 through a 2025 Social Impact Fund, which is going to be promoting 6 programs throughout Ontario, which is going to be amazing, especially for the newcomers that are wanting to be entered or want to gain access to the cannabis industry and doesn't necessarily have the right directions. So what we have in the OCS, they are going to be launching the workforce and safety. They are going to be promoting education, equity, youth engagement, and environment substantial across the whole Ontario, which is great. The initiatives include safe for use education from Guelph University, harm reduction for Black communities in Salou College, micro-credential on cannabis workplace safety, and the mentorship incubator for women in the Cannabis by Hire collective. The youth environmental projects also include students commission participatory, which are going to allow students to put in their input when it comes to developing structured information, especially when it comes to drug use and harm reduction. What we also have is the strike in British Columbia. So the BCGEU strike has shuttered all of provincial liquor and cannabis stores as 23,000 workers demand 8% wage hike, sparking an industry-wide concern. This is something that is also impacting the cannabis industry and some of my personal allies due to the fact that their LPs are not able to deliver or gain access to the cannabis that they need. So this is creating a shortage in their supply. Hopefully everything works out sooner than later, especially with the season changing and with our coming up to, I think, 5-6 years? Man, I can't even know. But either way, our anniversary is coming up, which I'll make sure to highlight for you. This is Debi Facey with the Canadian Coast to Coast Cannabis News Report. Peace.
One of the most shocking cannabis news stories last year was the report of an attempted robbery of a dispensary by 2 men who were shot dead by a store employee. This week, the trial concluded when the employee, Jason Steiner, was found not guilty in the double murder case. Steiner, who was working alone at the dispensary at the time when 3 men, armed, broke into the dispensary and started to rob the store. Steiner, who turned himself in 3 days after the incident, told the three perpetrators that he made his purchase and was leaving. A few minutes later, he returned with a gun and shot two of the three robbers, who were both under the age of 21. Surveillance video supported Steiner's account, and he was acquitted of all charges. Marianne Cursetjee has more in her Oregon report.
I'm Marianne from Alibi with the Oregon Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. An Oregon cannabis wholesaler has filed another legal challenge to Oregon's protectionist state cannabis laws. This lawsuit seeks to challenge the prohibition on interstate commerce by using the Dormant Commerce Clause. If this suit is successful, it will upend the current state-based cannabis regulatory framework. This is an uphill battle for sure. Also, in the news is a verdict on the case from a year ago, reported here, where a dispensary worker, where three men entered a dispensary to rob it and threatened to kill the employee with a firearm. The employee was able to exit the dispensary and shot and killed two of the three assailants. A jury found the dispensary worker not guilty of murder. I'm Marianne from Alibi with the Oregon Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
In the District of Columbia, medical cannabis cultivation sales declined 8% from the record month of May this year. For the first time, sales of vapes surpassed the $1 million level, with infused edibles declining. However, the one place where there was a significant uptick in sales was in concentrates, where they were up 78%. Now let's check in with Tina Tasaka in Nevada and with some interesting developments from the indigenous tribes in the cannabis market. Here's Tina.
I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies and Iconic Representation, and this is the Nevada and Tribal Nations Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Planet 13 Holdings, the Nevada-based cannabis company, best known for its world-class Las Vegas superstore, has just opened its 34th Florida dispensary, this one in DeLand, perfectly positioned off the busy I-4 corridor between Orlando and Daytona. This strategic location strengthens Planet 13's growing footprint across the Sunshine State, continuing its mission to bring premium cannabis experiences and exceptional retail design to the community. Researchers at UNLV have developed a new class of THC-free CBD-like compounds using carvone, a natural molecule found in caraway seeds, as a chemical foundation. In preclinical studies, these compounds, especially one called Plus CBD OCT, significantly reduces seizures, lowered seizure-related deaths, and improved healthy brain cell growth without the sedative side effects seen in many current medications. Published in Neuropsychopharmacology, the research could pave the way for more accessible seizure treatments that don't have to rely on cannabis plants. This is an exciting step forward for patients who have exhausted existing treatment options, said Dr. Dustin Hines, UNLV neuroscience professor and study co-author. Our goal is to design CBD-inspired medicines that are more effective and affordable for families facing epilepsy. In tribal news, Todd Thompson, an Ojibwe man from the White Earth Band, is challenging Minnesota's authority to prosecute cannabis offenses on tribal land. After recreational marijuana was legalized in 2023, Thompson kept selling cannabis at his shop, Acima Tobacco and Pipe, citing treaty rights and tribal law. Despite warnings, he was charged with felony possession. His case hinges on Public Law 280, which limits state power on the res and could set a major precedence for state tribal cannabis boundaries. That's it for the Nevada highlights and tribal nations. I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies and Iconic Representation for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Even though the federal government remains closed and reforms and rescheduling are getting pushed further and further away from the list of priorities, the race to be the 25th adult use legal state continues. Pennsylvania is still the odds in favorite to get it done, and their governor, Josh Shapiro, is waiting for his legislature to find a way to pass a bill so he can sign it. In the meantime, there is a palliative care bill making its way through the state house in Philadelphia. The Compassionate Access to Medical Cannabis Act, also known as Ryan's Law, would allow patients who receive treatment in hospitals to continue to use prescribed medical cannabis. The bill, sponsored by Senator John Kane, is named in honor of a California man who used medicinal cannabis during the final weeks of his battle with pancreatic cancer. Next up, the battle for acceptance in the state of Alabama, where Jennifer Boozer Stewart hosts a weekly radio show called Cannabama. Here's Jennifer with the latest from her state.
I'm Jennifer Boozer Stewart reporting from Alabama for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This week, the Alabama Alcoholic Beverage Commission, which is now the regulatory board in charge of the hemp industry, released their new rules and regulations that coincide with the passage of HB 445 in May of 2025. Now, they did remove the requirement for drinks to have an additional childproof cap, saying that a pull tab is federally compliant, similar to beer. And they removed the requirement that all beverages be kept in a locked refrigerator because larger grocery stores complained that they could not afford to have a dedicated employee standing around waiting to unlock a refrigerator. But now, in order to get a license from the ABC board, you must have a signed letter of approval from the town you want to do business in. And some towns have already imposed a 1-year moratorium on any new ABC licenses. So established hemp businesses in those towns will be put out of business because they cannot even apply for a license starting January 1st. Also, now you cannot advertise outside of the business or have any signs indicating what's inside. We don't know what that means for our logos, many of which have a cannabis leaf or partial cannabis leaf in the logo. It could also mean that I cannot keep doing my radio show if I do plan to open my dispensary again once these rules and regulations shake out and I'm able to apply for a license. Packaging cannot contain imagery for personal items, such as clothing, cell phones, earbuds, and ink pens. No idea what that is even for or where that even came from. There are also new types of licenses that limit what you can sell and where, and square footage requirements for retailers as well as grocery stores allowed to obtain a license. For example, a dispensary has to be a minimum of 500 square feet, and a grocery store has to be a minimum of 14,000 square feet to obtain different licenses. Each business will need to have a $25,000 surety bond before applying. The ABC board is approved now to do random searches and checks and created a monthly meeting to punish and prosecute anyone they believe is outside of the rules. Plus, it says, in any investigation, all evidence will be destroyed whether the individual is found guilty or innocent. So under a false report, they'll destroy your inventory afterwards. It also strictly bans any lounges, public consumption, samples, giveaways, or events based around hemp hosted by hemp companies. No more 420 in Alabama, y'all. There's also a requirement to submit inventory data and tax information every month to the ABC board, plus a yearly review and license renewal, where they could suddenly deny or shut you down at the start of any year. This is just more and more egregious rules added to a vague bill that is completely unconstitutional, harming businesses and the citizens of Alabama and the state tax revenue. Roll Tide, y'all. This is Jennifer Boozer Stewart reporting from Alabama for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
The FBI released their 2024 record for the arrests this week, and the results continue to be alarming. Over 190,000 people were arrested in the last year for cannabis possession crimes, despite the 40 states and Washington, D.C., who have decriminalized the plant medicine. Even though the totals of cannabis possession crimes has fallen in recent years, NORML's Deputy Director Paul Armentano said, quote, "Hundreds of thousands of Americans continue to be arrested annually for low-level cannabis-related violations, even though a majority of voters no longer believe that the responsible use of marijuana by adults should be a crime." Unquote. In Arizona, there was a major lawsuit that got dismissed, and Karen Black has that story.
I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting with the Arizona Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Arizona's cannabis licensing drama just hit a major turning point. A Maricopa County judge has officially dismissed the high-profile lawsuit accusing Governor Katie Hobbs, her chief of staff, and the state health department of improperly awarding a marijuana dispensary license outside legal deadlines to a subsidiary of Trulieve. The suit came from Arizona Wellness Center owner Mason Cave, who alleged the governor's team cut a backroom deal with lobbyists tied to Trulieve to secure a dual-use license for Sherry Dunn LLC. But Judge Joseph Creamer wasn't buying it. He ruled the plaintiffs didn't have standing to sue, and even if they did, there was no violation of law or the Arizona Constitution's gift clause. In short, the court said there was no proof of favoritism and the state was within its rights to settle a licensing dispute that had dragged on for years. The decision should put an end to months of speculation and appeals over how Arizona's dual-use program is enforced. But Mr. Cave's legal team hasn't ruled out one last shot at appeal. Turning now to another legal showdown, the U.S. Supreme Court is poised to address whether cannabis users can legally own firearms. Justices have declined one case, but will debate others this term that could redefine Second Amendment rights for medical marijuana patients nationwide. And here in Arizona, a top cannabis attorney says the state's own patients could be central to a landmark ruling if the justices take it up. Meanwhile, the hemp industry isn't sitting still. Arizona producers are back in court over the state's ban on THC-infused hemp consumables. The Court of Appeals granted them a temporary lifeline, halting enforcement of the ban while the case continues. Industry leaders say these products are vital to keeping family-run operations alive. And on Capitol Hill, Arizona hemp processors are joining other states in urging President Trump to block Congress from recriminalizing Delta-8 and similar hemp cannabinoids. They argue a crackdown could devastate jobs and investment tied to the legal hemp market. Now for business news. Cannabis retail sales across Arizona dropped nearly 13% year over year in September, but you wouldn't know it from the activity on the ground. Missouri-based Franklin's just launched its premium blunt line into Arizona shops, betting that quality still wins even in a crowded marketplace. And despite the economic chill, new dispensaries continue popping up across the valley. Story Cannabis just launched its Litchfield Park location October 8th. Jars Cannabis debuted in Anthem earlier this month, and Zenleaf is celebrating its grand opening in Chandler this weekend. Clear signs that even as overall sales cool, Arizona's cannabis investors still see plenty of green in the Grand Canyon state. That's all for this week's Arizona Report. I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
The cannabis industry is constantly fighting for respect at every level of government. The unjust tax code structure of the 280E clause that doesn't allow the industry to write off normal business expenses, including payroll, is the biggest injustice, and it will go away if cannabis moves to Schedule 3 of the CSA. Every other industry in the country enjoys that benefit, but not cannabis. So then there's the licensing discrepancy between cannabis and alcohol. In Colorado, the first-time licensing fees for cannabis companies is 735% greater than the first-time costs for liquor licenses. Jenny Germano has more on just another unfair, prejudicial rule for cannabis.
I am Jenny Germano with ICS Consulting. This is the Colorado Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Durango's cannabis dispensaries are raising concerns. In a recent city council meeting, officials discussed the substantial differences in licensing fees between cannabis dispensaries and other businesses. For instance, while a new retail cannabis business pays $10,000 in licensing fees, a new liquor store will pay just $1,197. There are also differences with renewal fees, with dispensaries paying $8,000 compared to liquor stores' fees of $422.50 when it comes to renewing their license. City Council person Kip Casso described this imbalance as an unfair fee burden left over from the early days of legalization in Colorado. The city implemented these higher fees in 2014 during a time when retail cannabis was unexplored and daunting for municipalities. However, as the industry has matured in Colorado, questions are being raised about the fairness of these fees by licensed operators. The deputy city clerk noted both liquor and cannabis licenses are more time-consuming to maintain than other licenses, requiring 15 to 20 hours annually for staff. The City Council is now considering a reevaluation of these fees to ensure they are equitable and reflective of the current landscape in Colorado. I am Jenny Germano with ICS Consulting, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
That will wrap up the B block, but we have one more section to go. And in this one, executive producer Jimmy Young tracks down one of the most outspoken advocates in the state of Nebraska, where Nebraskans for medical marijuana continue to fight political leaders to finally deliver what the voters passed by over 70% of the vote in the last election. We'll introduce you to Krista Eggers when Cannabis Coast to Coast News continues after this.
In the state of Nebraska, this issue has been going on for over a decade, where advocates, led the fight, went to the legislature year after year. We walked away empty-handed, no change in leadership.
Hi, I'm Jimmy Young, and it's time for School. That's School with a K. I love the name of this platform because it's the first course I'll be teaching where spelling really doesn't count. It's how words sound, how you pronounce them, and how clear your speech is. Do you have the mumbles? Do you have the dreaded itis, gap fillers? The course is called Teaching Generation Text to Talk. I've done this for decades as a professional broadcaster on TV. I've even won an Emmy Award as a sports talk show host for a kids show I co-created in the 1990s for the TV channel that I worked for in Boston. I'll also be offering a free 1 hour, once a week call-in show where you could just join me to ask any questions you want. I've got a background in sports, so I love to talk about that, but I've also built a network for one of the most controversial industries in modern society. That's right, it's the cannabis industry. I'm the executive producer of the nation's only TV news-style show called Cannabis Coast to Coast News with the very talented Alaina Pinto. Now, it's all about learning how to talk, to speak, to communicate like a broadcaster. It's epic! So join my community that I'm calling the Forever Young School of Communication. Sign up for the first course, Teaching Generation Text to Talk. And for now and forever, I'm Jimmy Young, and I look forward to talking to you.